Good day and welcome to Wisdom of the World. Today I'm going to tell a story about a cheater, somebody who made it whose profession it was to just trick and cheat other people, basically by playing on their fears. The story that I'm telling is set in England, but it actually also could have been in Germany or even the Netherlands. The story is called Of Owlglass and a Village Without Sin. And it goes like this. Once there was a trickster, a cheater, a coney-catching, cunning man called Owlglass, who traveled from town to town, village to village, from house to house, wearing many different disguises. Sometimes a priest, sometimes a potter, sometimes a peddler of wares. But on this day he arrived in the village disguised as a monk, a man of God. For Owlglass had heard that the people of this place desired luxury and partying more than anybody else, and they loved eating more than God. It was said that even the local priest cared more about his gambling dice than the divine. As Owlglass passed the churchyard, he could see it was true, for there were holes in the thatch of the roof and many of the windows were broken. And so it was. He waited until it was dark, and with spade and lantern he set to work digging at the grave of a blacksmith who was long dead. He dug and he dug and he dug some more until at last his spade struck bone, and Owlglass had himself the skull of the blacksmith. It was a fine, strong skull with a big jaw and bold brow ridges, and Owlglass cleaned and polished it to a shine. He had plans for this skull, for it was to rise above its station. From now on, he thought, it is no longer the skull of a simple blacksmith. Instead, it shall become the skull of Saint Brandon, the holiest of holy saints. Owlglass, the cheater, he tucked his so recently acquired skull beneath his gown, and he went about his ways. He went to the house of the priest, showed him the skull of Saint Brandon, and told him that the deceased man was the holiest of holy saints. The priest was a simple soul, and he allowed Owlglass to preach on Sunday next and show the congregation the skull of Saint Brandon. He agreed that Owlglass would offer the skull up to everybody so that they might pay to touch it. For Owlglass's tongue was as cunning and quick as ever it had been. Although his promise to split the profits with the priest may also have sweetened the uncomplicated cleric. The following Sunday the church was packed, as all had heard tell of the skull of Saint Brandon, and all agreed that he was the holiest of holy saints. Owlglass, the fake monk, climbed up into the pulpit and began to preach to all. He talked of God in heaven and devil in hell. He talked of Noah's deluge and of how an unfortunate fellow called Daniel fell into the lion's den. And when at last his knowledge of all things religious was spent, the king of cheating pulled the skull of the blacksmith from beneath his robes, holding it high for all to see. Behold, he called, this is the skull of Saint Brandon, the holiest of holy saints. and I have brought him to your village today to save your souls. Owlglass banged his fist upon the pulpit, and he gestured in dramatic fashion as he continued preaching to the people. For so pure was Saint Brandon in life, said he, that those who kiss his skull, they too shall be cleansed. Their ills shall be cured, and they shall be guaranteed their place in heaven above. And now the fake monk stared hard at the crowd. But, said Owlglass to the wide-eyed congregation, so pure was Saint Brandon in life that only the pure can touch his skill. It cannot be tainted by sin. Only those among you who have not committed bad deeds may pay what you can to kiss his skull. Now pointing at one and all, for the fake monk knew all the tricks of his trickster's trade, Owlglass said, any here who have sinned, all who are drunkards, cheaters, thieves, or worse, they must remain in their seats. For I shall not receive the money of cheaters, thieves, or whores today. And now Owlglass held out the skull for the congregation, for all the people to kiss, while the priest rang a bell loudly and began to chant. Well, it may have only been the skull of a blacksmith, taken a few nights since from its grave, but now men and women, old and young, rich and poor, came forward, all pushing and jostling so that they might pay to kiss the fake skull. They offered all they had, from a few poor pennies to gold, silver, and jewels, to prove to all that they were not sinners. Actually, those who had sinned most were first in the queue, giving the rings of their fingers to prove to everyone else that they had not sinned at all. Owlglass accepted all forms of payment. He touched their heads and he uttered some sham Latin blessings to all. He assured each and every member of the congregation that they were without sin and would be saved that day. While Owlglass, be he a saint or a sinner, saved or not, was certainly very rich. And watching him leave the village without sin, weighed down with all their money, I think that it is fair to say that he was guaranteed a good life in this world, if not the next. Thank you.